Chapter 10. Deer are weird. Gasp, Rio gasped. Who would take a bite out of a zucchini that was growing in our garden? Andrea looked at Ryan, who will eat anything. Emily looked at Ryan. Michael looked at Ryan. Alexia looked at Ryan. I looked at Ryan. Neil looked at Ryan. Everybody was looking at Ryan. Don't look at me, said Ryan. It wasn't Ryan, Miss Nichols said as he looked at the zucchini through a magnifying glass. I reckon it might have been a deer. Gasp, Rio gasped again. I looked around. I didn't see a deer anywhere. It could be more than one deer, said Mr. Tony. 2 deer? Arlo, 2 deer. 2 of them are still. 2 deer, I asked. Arlo, said Andrea. 2 of them are still called deer. Huh? How could 2 deers be a deer? Maybe they were twin deers. Could it be 3 deers? I asked. No, said Andrea. If 3 deers are 3 of them. If there were 3 of them, they are still called deer. So how many do you need before you call them deers? I asked. No matter how many deers you have, you still say deer, said Miss Nichols. But if you have 2 dogs, you don't say dog. I said, you say dogs. Deers aren't dogs, said Mr. Tony. And 2 deers are still called deer. 100 deers are still called deer, said Andrea. Deer are weird. The point is, a deer was eating our veggies, or maybe a bunch of them were eating our veggies. Why would a deer do that? Asked Alexia. Oh, I reckon it was hungry, said Mr. Nichols. Duh, we made this garden to feed the kids in our school, said Emily. Do not feed deer. That's right, everybody agreed. Mr. Tony suggested we build a fence around the garden to keep the deer out. He should get the Nobel Prize for that idea. That's a prize to give out to people who don't have belts. Mr. Tony got some wood and saws and hammers and stuff. We worked really hard musing and hammering and nailing. But it was fun. Building stuff out of wood is way more interesting than gardening. Finally, after 1,100,000 hours, we finished building the fence. It even had a gate that opened and closed. There, said Mr. Tony. This will keep the deers out of our garden. Chapter 11. Invisible Bunnies. We thought the fence around the garden wouldn't solve our problem, but it didn't. The next morning, Miss Nichols arrived on her tractor, wearing a t-shirt that said, I feel good from my head, tomatoes on it. Well, that tractor wasn't wearing the t-shirt. She was. Tractors don't wear clothes. We opened the gate to check on our veggies, and you'll never believe what we found. There was a bite taken out of a tomato. Gasped, Will gasped. Maybe the deer figured out how to open the gate, said Michael. Maybe it's really a really tiny deer, said Neil. And it got through the fence. Nope, said Miss Nichols. It isn't a deer. I reckon it must be something smaller than a varmint. Mr. Tony and Miss Nichols. Grown-ups always say when they are thinking. Nobody knows why. Miss Nichols and a bunny. Miss Nichols said a bunny was probably eating our garden veggies. Then she snapped her fingers. Grown-ups always snap their fingers when they have an idea. Nobody knows why. I have an idea, said Miss Nichols. We can set up a video camera in the garden. Then we'll be able to see what happened out here in the middle of the night. Miss Nichols should get the Nobel Prize for that idea. My parents put a video camera in my baby sister's room, said Alexia, so they can watch her in the middle of the night. Does your baby sister still steal veggies? I asked. Everyone laughed even though I didn't say anything funny. Miss Stoker gave us permission to get video camera. Mr. Nichols went up to the store to buy it, and she set it up in a grate in the garden with Mr. Tony. The next morning, as usual, we went to a garden to check on our veggies. Gasp! We all gasped. There was a bite taken out of the cantaloupe. Okie dokie, said Mr. Nichols. Let's have a gander at this video from last night. I reckon we'll find who did this. We went to the front office at the school and fast forward through hundreds of videos. As we watched, there were all pins and needles. We were on pins and needles. Well, not really. We were just standing there. If we were on pins and needles, it would have hurt. The point is, there were no bunny for the whole night. There was no movement at all in the video. Maybe it's really a smart bunny, said Emily. Maybe it's an invisible bunny, I suggested. Invisible bunnies don't exist, Arlo, I said, and Andrea said, rolling her eyes. How did she know? If invisible bunnies did exist, we wouldn't be able to see them. Who knows? We could be surrounded by invisible bunnies all the time, and we'd never know. Miss Nichols snapped her fingers again. I have an idea, she said. We'll have a steak out in the garden. I love barbecues, I said. Steak is one of my favorite foods. Not steak out, dumbhead, Andrew said. A steak out. Oh, that's different. Yes, said Miss Nichols excitedly. We'll have a sleepover in the gardens and find out who's been eating our veggies. She should get the Nobel Prize for that idea. Chapter 12. The Strikeout. Before we could have a sleepover in the garden, Miss Nichols gave us permission forms to bring home and get signed by our parents. Basically, if we won't sue the school if we get struck by lightning in the middle of the night or if we get attacked by wild animals. Sleeping outside is fun. We all brought flashlights and sleeping bags to school. That night, they spread around on the ground around the garden. Miss Nichols, Miss Stoker, Miss Banks, and Mr. Tony agreed to take turns to sleeping so that one of us would be awake and on guard on all the time. We're sure to catch that darn bunny or whatever it is, said Miss Nichols. We climbed into our sleeping bags, but it was too early to go to sleep. I wasn't tired. We should have a campfire and make s'mores, I suggested. That would be cool. We have to save our veggies, Arlo, Andrea said. Not to eat junk food. What does Andrea know? If we ate junk food all the time, we wouldn't have to bother growing veggies in the first place. Maybe if animals eat all our veggies, I wouldn't have to eat them. I was going to say something mean to Andrea, but I didn't have the chance because Miss Stoker held up his hand and made a peace sign, which means shut up. We all pointed at our flashlights at her. Hey kids, she said, do you know what tiny trees do in the army? Oh no, Miss Stoker is going to be one of her comedy routines. What do tiny trees do in the army? We all asked. They are in the infantry, she said. Get it? Infantry. We all laughed. But seriously, said Miss Stoker, I was standing in the garden early yesterday morning and wondering the sun had gone, where the sun had gone, and then it dawned on me. Some of us laughed. I'm making a belt of herbs from my garden, said Miss Stoker, but my friends say it's a waste of steam. A few of us laughed. I'd like to tell you about a girl who eats plants, said Miss Stoker. But you're probably heard of this. Harvard. Emily laughed. The other day, I cut down a tree just looking by at it. Miss Stoker. Then Miss Stoker. Yeah, I saw it with my own eyes. Nobody laughed. I know why you're not laughing, said Miss Stoker. You don't want to wake up the sleeping bags. Get it? Wake up the sleeping bags. I'm tired, said Alexia. Isn't it bedtime yet? One more thing before we go to sleep, said Miss Stoker. You should never tell secrets in the garden. Do you know why? Why? We all asked. The potatoes have eyes. Miss Stoker, said Miss Stoker. The corns have ears and beans talk. Get it? Beans talk. Beanstalk. Thankfully, Miss Stoker had ran out of gardening jokes. We settled in for the night. I don't know what happened because after that because I fell asleep. When we woke up the next morning, the first thing we did was ask the grown-ups if they saw any bunnies or other animals in the garden during the night. I didn't see a darn thing, said Miss Nichols. I didn't see anything, said Mr. Tony. I didn't, me neither, said Miss Stoker. That makes 4 of us, said Miss Banks. Maybe the bunny didn't come last night because it saw us and us sleeping here, suggested Andrea. Then we checked in the veggies. We checked the veggies in the garden, and guess what? There was a bite take out of the cucumber. Nobody guessed. It didn't surprise us anymore. It must have been the invisible bunny, I suggested. Nope, said Miss Nichols. I reckon that every is eaten our vegetables must be smaller than a bunny. Then she snapped her fingers.